Okay, we're rolling.
Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you. Glad to be with you. We are looking at how we as podcasters can improve our podcast hosting skills. And it's all around the idea of dealing with some maybe potentially difficult or complicated conversations on your show where the topic is going to be something that is going to demand your full attention. It's not like a lighthearted, happy-go-lucky podcast episode where we just hit record and see what happens. No, this is where you're going to sit down with a guest and have a conversation that is meaningful. Not that a happy podcast isn't meaningful, but in this context, there's deep meaning behind the story. You're going to talk about some pretty intense things are going to be covered on the show. And you want to show up as your best as the podcast host, and you want to deliver the best conversation for not just your guests, but also for the audience. If you're listening to this, you're like, I don't do interviews, Dave, I'm going to skip this episode. Hang on, because everything that we're going to talk about in relation to dealing with a guest can also be swapped out for your listener. So as we talk about creating a safe place for our guest on our show, today we're going to be talking about psychological safety in our podcast for our guest. We can also create psychological safety for our listener. So just swap guest with the word listener, and this still has a lot of meaning for you on your show. So we're going to cover this over the next few episodes. We're going to kind of get into this and unpack this a little bit more, but glad you're here. This is the first of 4 little mini episodes around the idea of being a better podcast host for your guest, for your listener, and also the idea that we need to create a safe place as podcasters, and we can't sleep on this. We can't snooze on this. This demands our full attention. So I'm glad you're here. Let's go. I recently had a guest on my show on Living the Next Chapter, my author podcast, livingthenextchapter.com. If you're so inclined, if you like reading and you like authors, it's a great podcast. Well over 760, I think, episodes at this point, at the time of recording. So there's a lot of authors on the show. And I recently had an author on. Her name is Linda Fishman. Her book is called Repairing Rainbows. And Linda came on to talk about her family story when, at 13 years of age, her mother and her 2 younger sisters died in a plane crash with 100 plus people. Everyone perished in this plane crash due to pilot error. And she had to navigate grief at 13 and losing her mother and her sisters. That bond was broken. And so we had a pretty intense conversation. And what we didn't want the conversation to be was gratuitous or just talking about the crash itself and, you know, the kind of the clickbaity way we could have gone with the conversation, which is usually how TV movies are made and television shows are made and social posts are created. And it's those, you know, things that make people want to see or curious about. It's kind of like that car accident on the highway where everybody wants to look, right? It's just, I didn't want that in the episode. I wanted it to be more about how this book helps people through loss. And that's what Linda wanted as well in the conversation. This demands your full attention. That reality right there is, I could have easily just done the whole interview about the plane crash. But that's not the intent of the interview. That's not the intent of the conversation. That's not the intent of the book. And that's not the guest's intent coming on the show. As a podcaster, I think we really could lose our credibility if we don't understand the intent of the conversation from the guest perspective, for the audience perspective, for our perspective, and what benefits the show, what benefits everybody involved, right? Because easily you could just go and just do what's easy and just talk about the event and leave it there. We wanted something different. When we create our podcast and bring on guests, it's good to have clarity about what we want to cover on the show, how this is going to work for the guest, how this is going to work for the listener. What's the goal line? What's the finish line? Where are we headed in this conversation? And Linda told me she didn't want to make it all about the crash and the event, but more about what happened after. And that's the part of her story she wanted to tell. And that's what we worked on together. As podcasters, we really need to create a safe place for our guests, especially if they're coming on to talk about something deeply personal, traumatic, life-changing. We need to create a place where these guests feel safe. And for our audience, if you don't have guests, we need a podcast that creates a safe place for them as a listener. We don't want to do anything that's out of character for the show, out of character for us as a host. And we don't want to put our guest in an awkward spot or our listener in an awkward spot when we go down a path that maybe we probably shouldn't have gone down. We need to create psychological safety before we hit record. That's why I love pre-interviews. And I'm going to try to win you over on this. A pre-interview is a great way to understand the intent of the conversation before we hit the mic at all. So that's my little plea for these pre-interview talks. So where does a safe interview start? A safe interview in podcasting starts before the conversation even begins. When your guest knows what to expect from you on your show, they relax. They feel safe in your hands as a podcaster. We need to let them know, if they don't know already, the tone of the show. For you as a guest, you should listen to the show before you even approach a show to be a guest on it. You need to know if your message matches the tone of the show. You can't change the podcast to be more like the tone that you want as a guest. Some shows just aren't for you. Just keep that in mind. So listen to the show in advance. Bonus tip. We need to build the connection with our audience and our guest, right? And there's a tone, an underlying tone and a feel to our show. The types of questions that we're going to ask our guests need to be discussed as well and reviewed. And most importantly, that they, as the guest, are in control of the conversation. When you're talking about things that are deeply personal, deeply meaningful, there's a deep story to it. It could be pain, loss, grief, anger, divorce, custody, people have passed away, legal things, right? Any of this stuff, right? We need to be super careful with this as podcast hosts. What I do in my interviews with my guests, especially when we're talking about something that's, like I said, needs to be handled with care. The conversation needs to be handled with care. I remind my guests in the pre-interview and before we record that they can pause, skip a question completely, or revisit anything after the recording if they want to. Not everybody asks for a copy of the recording before it goes live, but it's always an option. So feel free to offer that up as a host if you feel the conversation's heading in that direction, where you think that your guest might want to have some feedback on the final edit before it's released to the world. Do you have to do that? No. It's your show. You can do whatever you want. But is it a good thing to do as a human being? Take your show hat off for a second. As a human being, isn't it a good thing to kind of include the person that came on and shared that deeply personal story? It might be a good idea. So don't be too arrogant and say, it's my show, I can do whatever I want. It's not going to win you a lot of people in the long run. Focus on what your guest wants and make it a good experience for them. This pressure valve that you release by allowing them to have more control over the content, the final product, it removes that pressure that builds up, and it actually helps people trust you immediately. A simple pre-interview conversation or an email outlining expectations can make a huge difference in how open a guest is going to be and how willing they are going to be on your show to talk about the hard things. So keep that in mind. Give them that release, not the release that they sign that they can use their words on your podcast. I mean the release of, hey, you have some control here of what happens with this episode. This is your episode. It's here for you, and you have final say. Doesn't have to happen all the time, but at least it's there. Just like a fire extinguisher on the wall. We don't use it every day. We don't use it all the time. But when there's a fire and we need it, it's there. Same thing. So the reason behind this episode is based on a book I've been looking at. It's called The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. And it's a book about psychological safety. And the concept is explored in her book, where people are more willing to contribute when they feel safe from judgment or consequence. I'll have a link for the book in the show notes, but the full name of the book is The Fearless Organization, Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning, Innovation, and Growth. You're like, Dave, why are you reading this book? Well, my background's in HR. So I love any kind of books that fit what I've gone to school for and what I've done in the past. So that's kind of why it's in my world right now. But this really helps you to understand the culture of psychology and safety in the workplace. We can bring that same concepts over to podcasting because we're dealing with people, right? Podcasts are dealing with people just like work is dealing with people. It helps us to explore the link between psychology, safety, and high performance in the workplace and create a culture that's safe to express ideas, ask questions, and admit mistakes, and to nurture a level of engagement and candor that's required in today's knowledge economy, and also follow a step-by-step framework for establishing psychological safety in your team, your organization, even your podcast. And get rid of this yes approach to everything and step into some real performance to help with creativity, clarifying your goals, achieving accountability. All of this is in the book, The Fearless Organization. So check it out. Amy Edmondson is the author, and I'll have a link for you in the show notes as well. But that's kind of where the idea of psychological safety has kind of crept into my world. And I thought, wow, for podcasters, are we creating a psychologically safe place for our guests? I think we really need to understand that. The one thing I took away from reading the book, too, was that not every idea is a good idea. And you're like, wait a minute. And yes, and the other part was there are stupid ideas. There are stupid questions. And yes, dissent can slow things down, but through walking through the essential parts of this creative process in this book, people really, they need to be allowed to voice half-finished thoughts, ask questions from completely what seems like left field, and brainstorm things out and kind of be safe enough to be able to do this. And it feels awkward, but this is where the real connection happens. And I like this idea that people don't have to have everything fully fleshed out. That's a good conversation to capture in your podcast. Not something that's super scripted where I read my question, you read your answer, I read my question, you read your answer. No, I like the idea that we can flub up. We can kind of stumble over our words in our response. We can take a pause and think about the question before we respond. All of this stuff is psychologically safe for our guests. And through a pre-interview, you can discuss this. You can say to them, listen, I'm going to ask you a question. And if you feel like you need a moment to think about the answer, don't just feel like you're obligated to jump in. That's where all the ums, the ahs, the stammers happen, the you knows, everybody knows, that kind of stuff. Those are filling in gaps while I'm trying to formulate my answer. Allow people to understand that there's room for them to think. There's room for them to be human on your show. And it doesn't have to be super perfect. Keep it in mind. Because when people feel safe, people will open up to you like a flower. They'll just open right up to you because they feel safe with you. That you're not there to make them look silly. You're not there to make them feel awkward. You're not there to make them look stupid in the moment. I can trust you. And they'll feel it. They will feel it through the camera lens when you record online. They'll feel it in person if they're in your studio sitting across the table from you. They'll feel it because it comes from your heart. It comes from who you are. And they will respond. Safety is a great glue that brings it all together as podcasters. So make your space safe for your guests, and you'll have a great conversation. So here at the How to Podcast series, we love to hear from you. You might think that we get a lot of feedback. Man, we don't. We don't get a lot because people just feel like, why bother? Like, why? Does Dave really care what I have to say? And I do. I actually do really care what you have to say. I love your input. I love hearing from you. And we've started a survey for our listening audience, which includes you right here, right now. And I'd love, love, love for you to head over to howtopodcast.ca. And you'll see our survey right there on our website. And take a few minutes, come through, answer the thoughtful questions we're asking of you to make the show better. Not just for you, but for everyone. Your feedback is really going to help shape the show. And I, selfishly, just want to hear from you. So if you're thinking, Dave probably already knows what I think, I don't. I really don't. I'm not good at reading minds. My wife will confirm that completely. So I don't really know what you think of the show. I don't know if you like it, if you like how long the show is, how long the episodes are, that Dave's doing 365 episodes in a year. Oh my gosh. Like, I would love to hear from you and get your thoughts on this very show right here. So head over to howtopodcast.ca. Click on our survey link. It's also in the show notes for every episode, in the most recent episodes, and I'd love to hear from you. So, as a listener of this here very show, your feedback can make this show so much better. So much better. And I'm not drowning in emails and voice messages and speak pipes and buy me a coffees right now. So, I'm putting the ask out to you right now, as a listener of the show, and you're still here, that you take a moment, head over to our website, click the link in the show notes for any episode, and go to our survey and let us know your thoughts about this show, how it could be better, and what you love, and what you're like, Dave, can you stop doing this? That would be really helpful. Thanks for being here and being part of the How to Podcast family. See you over at howtopodcast.ca. Talk soon. Thanks for being here. Bye. You're still here. That's amazing. You just proved to all the apps that this podcast is worth listening to. So thank you. The question I had was, Dave, what have you stopped putting in your show notes? What have you taken out like you don't do anymore? It's interesting because over the last, 7-ish years, my show notes have evolved. Things have changed. There's new tools. There's AI now in the world. There's a lot of different things you can use to make your show notes better. I do go back and I look at some of my show notes. I think what I used to do is my show notes were pretty sparse. I didn't have a lot of detail. I have a link to my guest or a link to a book or a link to whatever. I'd have a link to my website. Always had that. But the level of detail and understanding that my show notes, the notes you see on your phone as you're listening to this right now, those notes haven't always been a huge priority for me because I didn't understand the power of what you could put in there. And there's actually things now that are pulling that information in. If you go look at Pod SEO, for example, I have a link for you in the show notes. Pod SEO they actually will identify words from your show notes, from your show description, from your episode titles. And they're actually pulling them out and giving you rankings on that. So if they're seeing it so they can report on it, then you should be using them. So I would encourage you to make your notes that go along with the episode to be concise, not overly wordy, not stuffed with a bunch of unrelated words and terminology that has nothing to do with the content. You want to give Google good words. You want to give your podcast app good words. Again, think about what's going to be coming down the road. And no matter how words are captured in your show notes today, in the future might be different. So the best words possible for that episode that answers the question for your guest and for the listener, whatever it is that you think would be meaningful for somebody listening to that episode, then put that in. And talk to people like they're people. The AI tools that we're all using at this point are more about people and interaction with people than a bunch of list of keywords and stuffing keywords into a show notes and calling it a day. So talk to people in your show notes. Address your episode titles to people. The search engines are trying to replicate what humans would be looking for. So keep that in mind and tweak your old episodes and see if it helps you. Tweak your old episode titles. You can do that without uploading a new version of the episode. You can simply go into the edit field on your hosting site and go into the episode title, make a few tweaks, go into the show notes components, make sure that you have all your episodes, your links are there, and maybe update some of the information. See and play with it, and then monitor and see what happens. See if you get some new listens. You never know. Especially if you have past episodes that talk about something that's in the news right now. So recently, at the time of recording, we had people travel around the moon and come back. So if you had an astronaut on your show 2 years ago, that's in the news right now. That's in the public knowledge and the public search right now. So you might want to go back and just make sure the episode show notes talk about traveling to the moon or space or astronauts, or you want to make sure those words are in your show notes. Because if your podcast is evergreen, people are searching for that right now. So leverage that. And the more you do that, the better. So yeah, keep me in mind if you have any questions, how to podcast.ca. Love to help you make your show notes better. We can talk about this together. I'd love to help you. Come reach out. Let's talk soon.